need to eat fruit. And of course, the teeth and the jaws are just the first half of that, right? The other thing we're going to start to, to look at soon is what are the adaptations of the gut for trying to digest that stuff.
I was about to say that's a whole nother story.
Yeah. But that's kind of the thing that I'm most stoked about with my lab is finally having the time. Well, I'm not going to have time. My students are going to have time to look into how fishes eat fruit. And I could talk more about why this is important from a broader perspective.
That was gonna be my question. Like, how does that impact like the functionality of the entire ecosystem? Because it sounds like kind of like helping the ecosystem maintain itself. Like they're dispersing the seeds. And it's also weird thinking about fish eating fruit in the first place. But it's clear that they're really involved in the maintenance of the ecosystem.
Yeah, they absolutely are. And we've only really started to think about this over the last 40 years, because that's when Goulding finally put out his work. But really only in the last maybe 10 to 20 have we really started to realize how important fishes are as seed dispersers, especially in places like the Amazon, right? So the Amazon floods, and that allows the fishes to travel kind of deep into the forests. And of course, if you're eating the fruit and you're going to pass the seeds, these things, poop the seeds out. And then as the waters recede, the seeds have now traveled away from their parent plant, and they get a chance to sort of grow in a place where they don't have to compete with the parent, right? And it's really cool. Some great work by a collaborator of mine, Sandra Correa, has found that some of the seeds have evolved so that they won't even germinate. They won't even start to grow unless they pass through the gut of the fish.
No, that's crazy.
Right? And so that's a crazy example of the coevolution of the plant and the fish, right? In the same way that we would talk about, how clownfish live in the sea anemones and stuff, right? And how they have sort of co-evolved through this, through what we call a mutualism, right?
Yeah.
So what's been really interesting lately, that some folks have found, is that, these big pacus can migrate quite a long way up and down the Amazon, and other parts of South America too. And so they can disperse these seeds across thousands of kilometers. But they're also extremely important food fishes. They're huge. So that one fish can feed a lot of people. And so they're in high demand. And some research has shown that removal of those fishes in an unsustainable way has led to the collapse of some of these seed dispersal networks. And so some of those fishes are farmed and raised, so that's good. So you can sort of offset some of the loss of the wild fishes.
Yeah.
But that's a concern. And so what I'm hoping, not that my research will really directly teach us a lot about that, but I think we will sort of show, what kind of fruits are these fishes able to eat? What size fruits? There's an interesting thing where some of these fishes are seed dispersers and others are seed predators, so they might actually consume the seeds too. So trying to figure out what are the teeth and jaws that characterize a seed predator versus a seed disperser is kind of an interesting thing to think about. And so that's kind of where we're hoping to sort of, fall in all of this, in a very large collaborative
in a broad sense.
Yeah. So yeah, I think they're just such an interesting study system. And of course, there's some interesting sides to this too, where some of the plants that they distribute are very culturally and economically important for like the regions too. So the rubber tree, which is what we used to get non-synthetic rubber from, is actually dispersed by these fishes. If you're in the Amazon, there's lots of tribes who use kind of these herbal like melanges. So you've ever heard of like ayahuasca? It's like a mixture of herbs that folks will use to go sort of get in touch with the divine, get in touch with themselves, that sort of stuff. Turns out that one of the key ingredients of that herbal mixture is a plant that's distributed by these fishes, right? So not only are they important as primary food fishes to those communities in and of themselves, they're also important to the ecosystem, and they're important from the cultural standpoint too. And I think this should just make us think about how important kind of all these little parts of the ecosystem are, in ways that we really can't predict or think about, just because everything is so interwoven. I
was gonna say, so intricate. You can't really pinpoint how taking one thing out is gonna affect the entire thing.
Yeah. And I guess the last point that I'll make is that even though people are pretty familiar, I think, with like mammals and birds spreading seeds, and like I said before, like our understanding of how fishes have done this has really only bloomed in the last like 10 to 20 years, maybe 40 years at the most. These pacus, these fruit-eating fishes, we actually found predate a lot of the arrival of primate groups in South America, and the origin of a lot of bird groups that actually spread these seeds too. So, in fact, fishes probably were some of the first seed dispersers, before the groups that we're more like familiar with are around, right? So, and it's crazy to me that we had no clue that this was happening, or at least the Western world and Western science, up into within our like lifespan, which is unreal. And of course, I think that really speaks to how important it is to incorporate like indigenous knowledge into what we do, right? So anyway, cool fish, cool story, cool fruits. I'll pause there.
What's another, like, what do you think is the most like unique adaptation that you've seen throughout any species of animal, anything? Or what are your top three, actually?
My top three animals?
Yeah, that have these unique adaptations.
Unique adaptations. I love hyenas. I've always loved hyenas. I have no idea why. I think they're just super cool. They are, built for crushing stuff, right? And so, various kinds of dogs, bears, some cats can crush bone, but hyenas specialize to some extent on being able to crush the hardest parts of a scavenge or of a kill. And so if you actually look at the engineering behind, the engineering that explains how their skulls have evolved to be shaped a certain way, they have these really big foreheads, and the foreheads actually help distribute the stresses that are transmitted from the prey to the teeth to the jaws. And then they're kind of distributed over the whole skull, so that there's not one point of the jaw or teeth or skeleton that's getting too much force applied to it. So, I mean, that's kind of a weird, I'm a fish guy and I'm like, no, but hyenas are really cool. But hyenas inspire me a lot about, in terms of how animals crush hard stuff. What's another good example? I'm always fascinated by convergence. And I think, the idea that totally unrelated groups of animals can evolved similar structures that perform sort of a similar task. And so, for instance, everybody knows that like chickens have gizzards, right? And so it's this like it's a muscular part of the GI tract that is usually filled with like grit, with small stones and sand and stuff that helps like chickens grind, seeds and plant parts.
Teeth.
Turns out, they don't have teeth, and so the gizzard kind of fills the role of a grinding, like what we would call like a triturating like structure. Turns out fishes have those too. So if you lived in the panhandle of Florida, you probably grew up eating the gizzard from mullet. But they're not the only fish that have that as well. Like if you see like herring or shad, a few species have that too. So I think it's really interesting whenever you see these really wild convergences between drastically different groups of animals, right? And I think, just as a plug for some of the other work that we're doing in the lab, right now I work with the betas and gouramis. So these are the fishes you'll find in any Petco, PetSmart,
pet stores,
the dumb, sad fishes that are in bowls. And one of the reasons why they're in bowls is because they're hard for poor fish parents to kill. And part of why that is because they have this organ in the back of their skull called the labyrinth. That's kind of like a bony lung. It's an air breathing structure that lets them breathe from like the surface. And it's wild. Whenever you look at it, it's this very, very thin, bony structure that's housed in this kind of like bubble-like chamber. And that bony structure is covered with really thin tissue that's packed with like arteries and veins and things like that help with gas exchange. And essentially these things live or can live in like a puddle and be totally content, even when no other fish can live in there, because there's not enough dissolved oxygen to breathe through their gills. And in fact, there have been studies that have basically shown that because these fish depend on breathing air so much, they've actually reduced the sort of investment that they have in their gills. And so if you actually block some species of gouramis and stuff from reaching the surface, you can drown them, which is obviously not a nice thing to do, and you shouldn't do it. But it's crazy, I think I think it's just surprising to think that a fish can drown. So those are some weird examples, I guess, of structures.
Those are really cool though. It's like there's so much stuff, and this is why I love doing this, because I just learn so much stuff that I don't know, but I can relate it to different stuff that I'm doing, and then also share it. I love it though. Good. And again, that's what got me interested in fishes, because I tell my students all the time, there's 35,000 species of fishes. If you're interested in something, climbing, flying, burrowing, whatever, eating hard stuff, odds are there's a fish that do it. There's a fish that does that specifically.
And moreover, odds are there's more than one group of fishes that do it, which makes it a better kind of evolutionary experiment for you to kind of see what they share alike. And the funny thing about that now that I'm in a paleo museum, is not only are there fishes that do that thing and a bunch of groups that have done it, there's also fishes that are extinct that probably did it too. And we just don't really know that much about them. So it's just a great group of animals, especially if you, like weird stuff. So,
I do. But thank you so much for joining me on this episode of Teach Me and sharing all your deep breadth of knowledge on this subject. It was great. Fun as well.
Thanks for the invite. Yeah.
What were you gonna say?
Go ahead. I was just gonna have a bit of a shout out, if that's okay. folks might have heard that I stutter. And I just want to say that you can be a scientist, you can still teach and things if you have, like a hearing or like a fluency disorder. I'm really proud to, I wouldn't have known that I've gotten this far unless I had a prof who also had like a stammer. I just want to put that out there for folks to know.
Shout out you for doing that. Shout out you. And this was great. It was fun. Yeah, again, thank you so much. I'm gonna get you on an episode of the Through Jeremiah's Eyes, the main segment as well at some point. But thank you so much for your time. And I hope everybody learned something new today. And I hope that you check out the next episode for another episode of Teach Me.
Awesome. Thanks.